A 15-year-old girl heard voices by a river. 2 years later, 40,000 members of her own people were dead, killed not by war, not by disease, but by a prophecy they chose to obey. The Xhosa cattle killing of 1856 is one of the most devastating acts of collective belief in recorded history. And the questions it raises have never been fully answered. Why did an entire civilization choose to destroy its own food supply? Who, or what, was really behind the prophecy? And why did the only people who benefited from the catastrophe turn out to be the British? To understand 1856, you must understand the world the Xhosa people had been living in for decades. The Cape Frontier Wars, a series of brutal colonial conflicts between Xhosa chiefs and British forces, had ground on for generations, each war ending with more land surrendered, more autonomy stripped away. Then, in 1854 and 1855, a new catastrophe arrived. Bovine pleuropneumonia, a devastating cattle disease, swept through the Xhosa herds. Cattle were not merely livestock to the Xhosa. They were currency, dowry, the measure of a man's standing, the foundation of every social ceremony. When the cattle died, something at the core of Xhosa civilization died with them. A nation that had already lost so much was now facing the loss of everything. Into this world of accumulated grief, Nongqawuse brings her vision. The ancestral spirits, she says, have spoken clearly. Slaughter every remaining cow. Burn every grain store. Leave no food standing. In return, the spirits promise three things. The dead Xhosa warriors will rise from the sea. New, perfect cattle will appear to replace those destroyed. And the British, the source of every wound, will be driven into the ocean and vanish from the land forever. It is a prophecy of total restoration. Every loss reversed. Every humiliation undone. Every ancestor returned. For a people who had been losing for decades, it must have sounded like the only possible exit from an impossible situation. Nongqawuse's uncle, Nongqawuse, is the first to hear the prophecy. His decision in that moment will shape the fate of his entire people. Nongqawuse is not an ordinary man. He had formerly served in the British colonial church. He knows the world of the colonizer from the inside. He has standing, credibility, and connections to the Xhosa chiefs that a teenage girl alone could never command. When he endorses his niece's vision and begins carrying it to the leadership of the Xhosa nation, the prophecy transforms overnight from one girl's experience into an official spiritual communication from the ancestors. His role in the catastrophe that follows is, according to historical analysis, deeply entangled with hers. In August 1856, Chief Sarhili, Paramount chief of the Kalika Xhosa and the most powerful leader in the region, gives the prophecy his formal endorsement. The moment he does, the movement becomes unstoppable. In Xhosa society, the Paramount chief's word carries the weight of law, tradition, and divine authority combined. When Sarhili says the ancestors have spoken and the cattle must die, communities across the Xhosa lands begin to comply. Kraals that have held cattle for generations are opened. The slaughter begins, not in panic, not in madness, but in deliberate, organized, faith-driven obedience. Not everyone believes. The Nongqawuse, which translates as the hard ones, the unbelievers, are the Xhosa chiefs and families who refuse to kill their cattle. They watch in horror as the slaughter spreads. They argue, they resist, they attempt to reason. The response from the believers is swift and brutal. The Nongqawuse's cattle are forcibly confiscated. Their families are ostracized. Some are physically attacked. The prophecy has split Xhosa society along a line more devastating than any the British had managed to draw, between those destroying their food and those watching it happen, powerless to stop it. Between 1856 and 1857, an estimated 400,000 cattle are killed across Xhosa territory. 400,000 animals, the accumulated wealth of generations, the foundation of every social bond, every marriage contract, every ceremony of community. The grain stores are burned alongside them. Fields that should have been planted for the next harvest are left bare. The Xhosa believers do not waver. The prophecy is clear. The resurrection day is set for February 18, 1857. And in the weeks before that date, thousands of families gather near the coast and wait, hungry, faith intact, for the dead to rise from the sea. February 18, 1857. Dawn breaks over the Indian Ocean exactly as it has every morning before it. The surface of the sea is unbroken. No warriors rise from the waves. No white cattle appear on the hillsides. The sky does not part. The ancestors do not speak. By mid-morning, the silence is absolute and final. The prophecy has failed, and the Xhosa people who obeyed it are now standing on bare ground, in empty kraals, with no cattle, no grain, and no harvest planted, facing a winter with nothing. The famine that follows is measured in statistics that barely convey the human reality. An estimated 40,000 Xhosa people starved to death. The pre-killing Xhosa population in the region numbered roughly 105,000. In a matter of months, approximately 40% of an entire people are gone. Families that owned hundreds of cattle in 1855 die in the same lands they have occupied for centuries, surrounded by the bones of the animals they sacrificed. Children die first, then the elderly. Communities that were coherent social organisms in January 1857 are silent by summer. A further 150,000 Xhosa survivors are forced to leave their ancestral lands and seek food and work in British colonial settlements. They arrive destitute, dependent, and stripped of every social structure that gave their community meaning. British Governor Sir George Grey, watching all of this unfold, sees his opportunity. He refuses emergency food relief to Xhosa communities unless the chiefs formally surrender their political authority and their land. The cattle killing has achieved in one season what decades of frontier war had failed to accomplish: the permanent, total destruction of independent Xhosa civilization. The British had not started it, but they had certainly finished it. Historians have wrestled with a question ever since. Did the British help engineer the prophecy? Nongqawuse, the uncle who gave the prophecy its authority, had formerly served in the British colonial church. He had connections to the colonial sphere that no one has ever fully mapped. Governor Grey had been actively seeking a pretext to dismantle the Xhosa chieftainship for years. Historian J.B. Pyers, who wrote the definitive 1989 account, The Dead Will Arise, examines the evidence carefully and does not fully acquit the colonial administration. The evidence does not convict, but it does not exonerate either. The question lingers. Nongqawuse survives the famine. Governor Grey takes her into British protective custody, which means, in practice, that the girl whose prophecy killed 40,000 of her own people is now housed, fed, and protected by the colonial administration whose interests the prophecy served. She lives the rest of her long life under a false name on a farm in the Eastern Cape. She dies in 1898, 41 years after February 18, 1857. What she believed, what she understood, what guilt or faith she carried through those 4 decades, she took to her grave. No one ever recorded her speaking publicly about it again. Historians compare the Xhosa cattle killing to the ghost dance movement among the Lakota Sioux in 1890. 30 years apart, on opposite sides of the earth, but the same structure. A colonized people facing the total destruction of their way of life, turning to supernatural intervention as the only remaining option. The prophecy is not evidence of irrationality. It is the final resort of a civilization that has exhausted every rational option and still keeps losing. When everything is being taken from you, and you have no army, no political leverage, and no law on your side, a voice from the ancestors may be the last thing left to believe in. 40,000 people died because they believed a prophecy. But they believed that prophecy because their world had been dismantled by colonial war, cattle disease, and the slow erasure of every institution that gave their civilization coherence. Nongqawuse did not cause the catastrophe. She was the match. The kindling had been laid for decades, by frontier wars, by land seizures, by a colonial project that left the Xhosa with nothing left to lose and nothing left to try. The past rarely has clean villains or simple explanations, and the stories that matter most are usually the ones that resist both. History's Hidden Chapters covers those stories every week. If this one moved you, subscribe, because there are hundreds more waiting.